Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be power ranking every AFL team after round 8. Pretty much all the AFL teams have played the same amount of games after round 8 except for Gold Coast and Essendon obviously being a game behind because of their cancelled match earlier in the year. But I do want to make this a series as well, so it was actually meant to be after round 6 but I just didn't get time to film it. Then last week I was also busy, so I've actually got time to film it. So we're just going to be doing it after round 8, then we're going to be doing it after round 12 and round 18, then obviously round 24 at the end of the year. So usually every 6 rounds, it's a bit later, I am doing these power rankings at round 8, obviously not round 6, but let's get into the rankings. Now, of course, it is going to be quite similar to the ladder, obviously. We are still quite early in the season. We're getting towards the mid-block now. We'll start off with 18. I think this is a pretty obvious one. I do indeed have the West Coast Eagles, who are still winless at the moment. Yeah, look, the Eagles, they just haven't really found anything this year. You know, I think they've had a couple of close, decent performances against Brisbane, Essendon, but that's really been it this year. You know, their trades that they brought in, they brought in Elijah Hewitt, you know, it would have helped them, but they just haven't really been able to find any wins this year. And look, I think you just do have to put them last. Maybe you can make an argument for North being here, but they're the only team that hasn't got a win yet. So till they can actually get a win, I think they'll move up in the power rankings. But yeah, the Eagles, for me, they've just been really disappointing this season for quite a few people. And I definitely do still think that they will get a couple more wins coming onto the season. They've got a really good chance to get their first win against against the Tigers this week. So let's see if they can win that. Hopefully they don't beat my Saints in a couple of weeks in Perth. But yeah, look, I definitely do think they will at least probably win at least 2 games in the season, but this year. But yeah, look, it's probably going to be another long season for the Eagles fans, and not the best start, and I do have to have them in at 18th, unfortunately. Moving on to 17th now. Again, a pretty obvious side here. I do have North Melbourne. Now, the Roos only do have that one win over Melbourne where they surprisingly won by 60 points. Other than that, they've lost all their games. So, yeah, quite surprising that only win was by 60 points. They just, yeah, really dominated the rest of the game, and they didn't let the D's come back like they have really let a lot of sides come back in this year. Just the same old story. They've had some really close losses this year, North Melbourne, to Port Adelaide, Essendon on the weekend. They even had another close game earlier in the year. But then again, they have been just getting thrashed by sides like the Blues, a couple of those other sides. So yes, they have got a win so far, but I feel like they probably still aren't living up to those expectations that we all had. It's just the same old story for North, unfortunately. I definitely do think they should be able to find a couple more wins moving forward against the Eagles and maybe even the Tigers. We'll have to see. But yeah, look, they've been pretty disappointing apart from that Melbourne game at Marvel, and they certainly do play some better footy at Marvel. They actually don't score as much as Marvel, but they seem to play better defense at Marvel and make it a closer game than away. So look, they've been definitely improving, but again, I just have to have them in at 17th. I think they will improve, but they just haven't been able to find much this year. So, yeah, look, with the one win, it's pretty much similar to last year. They're just picking up where they left off, which isn't great. We're not seeing much improvement, but still think they have been slightly better than the Eagles this year, and they gave up a good couple of good performances, and they've proven they can score. It's just matter of fact of how they can defend and how they're going to improve upon that moving forward if they want to start winning more games. So I've got North in at 17th. Moving on to 16th, I was considering putting Melbourne here. I have gone with the Tigers. Now, again, so far it is the exact same as the ladder, but I feel like that's how it should be. And yeah, look, I definitely could have had the D's here if they didn't beat if they didn't win on the weekend against the Eagles, because if they had lost that, then maybe they should have been below Richmond. But Richmond are a win behind Melbourne, and look, I just wanted to focus on the Tigers. They've actually been pretty decent to start off. They've been a little bit more of the surprise packet of the year without being too surprising. That is, they've got 2 wins already when some people even predicted them not to win a game. Like maybe if they had won one game, yeah, sure. But they've actually won 2 games. They've obviously been in the Suns and the Blues, so yeah, look, they've just been pretty promising to start off the season. They've also had some decent performances where they have lost by under 30 points. For instance, against Brisbane at the G, they played actually pretty well in that game. I thought that their younger side, they obviously are a younger list and the youngest in the comp, and they definitely are showing some signs of improvement this year. And they have proven to have some good blocks throughout games, but they just can't really close out games, I feel like, definitely throughout quarters. Even in that Gold Coast game, they did allow the Suns to come back. Obviously, that's going to happen when you're a young side, but Yeah, look, they've been pretty well this year, the Tigers, and I definitely do think they will find a couple more wins in this year. So they're probably looking for about 4 wins, and I don't think they will finish as the Wooden Spooners. I definitely think they'll finish maybe in that bottom four, definitely. But the Tigers have actually been pretty decent to start off and pretty convincing, and the fans will be happy with where they're at right now. Unfortunately, I just can't have them any higher at the moment. So yeah. Tigers for 16th for me. Moving on to one of the more informed teams on the comp, I do have Melbourne now. Now, you could make an argument that they could be higher than the likes of Sydney and Carlton. However, yes, they are in form, and this is all about power rankings. But when you look at the sides they have beaten, they haven't been the most convincing year. Is the Swans. They obviously just came off a win against the Giants, and the Blues. They're kind of flat track bullies as well, but they did beat the Cats. The D's, their best win probably was at the G against Freo, but even Freo have proven that they weren't that good away. You know, they just got thrashed by my Saints this week. They've also had a away loss down at GMHBA to Geelong, which isn't easy travelling there. But so yeah, look, the D's, they've definitely been more in form, and you do have to give them respect. They are starting to find things around the ground. I also do have them lower than the likes of the Swans and the Blues, is because they still have lost to North Melbourne, and they still had really poor start to the season. But you know, I definitely do think they are finding their rhythm, and their season is well and truly still alive, especially if they do win this week against Hawthorn, which I definitely do think is a possibility. Their midfield has just been able to find a bit more in these last few weeks and really work together. They are starting to kick a few more goals, so they're really just connecting with their forward line and through the midfield. Their back line, obviously, it's been a bit more of the disappointment. I feel like they are conceding a few big scores while not scoring much. But yeah, the D's, even though they have won 3 in a row, I just can't really put them any higher. They've still been pretty disappointing to start off their season in how they've been losing. And when you look at the list, yes, it's not as good as it was in 2021, and the brand they play wasn't good as in 2021. But they've still been disappointing with that list, and they've still had losses that they should never have with that list. So I do have the D's in at 15th. Moving on to 14th now, I do have the Blues. Now, the Blues, obviously, they were disappointing on the weekend against Adelaide. Like the D's, they actually had won 3 in a row previous to that. And again, kind of like the D's, they have been a little bit more of flat track bullies this year, beating two poor sides. They did get a good win against Geelong, which was obviously good for their sake. But yeah, look, the Blues have had a really poor start. They started off their season 0-4, obviously, and yeah, look, they just haven't been getting things right like they were getting last year. I feel like definitely their midfield has been lacking, and you know their players just haven't really been stepping up in second halves, especially. And you know you're not going to win many games if you can't win second halves, which is arguably the most in football, because we do see teams start off slower now and usually get better towards the games. The Blues, on the other hand, are I feel like the opposite, so they need to work on their consistency throughout quarters for me, and I definitely think they did get shown up by a definitely bigger opponent in Adelaide, who are just much stronger than them. So probably says where they're at right now. I can't have them too much higher. You can make an argument that they are ahead of the Swans, which will be my next team. But yeah, look, the Blues, they've been nonetheless disappointing, and hopefully they can find the up moving on forward for them. Obviously not this week, because they are playing the Saints, so hopefully the Saints can get up. But yeah, the Blues have been pretty disappointing this season. Moving on to 13th now, I do obviously have the Swans. Now the Swans are kind of honestly a little bit lucky to be up this high. And again, kind of like Freo and a couple of other sides, they have been disappointing despite their tough fixture. You know, they've played some really good sides, like the sides of the Hawks, the Pies, the Lions. They've actually played a few tough opponents, but I feel like the Swans have just been lacking quite a few things. They haven't been able to score much as well. Their ball movement has slowed down much more under Dean Cox. And again, they have dealt with injuries as well as dealing with the new coach, which can be hard. Obviously, Dean Cox is just slightly fitting into the role now, so he's still getting used to things. So maybe they aren't as lucky to be maybe they aren't lucky to be down that low. So yeah, look, I feel like the Swans, they'll get better as the season goes on. You know, I still think finals could be on the cards. I probably still wouldn't have them making it now, but I could definitely see them being like a Brisbane of last year and just really forming on in the second half. You know, they did have a good win over GWS on the weekend in the Battle of the Bridge, where they have really just owned GWS lately in those matchups. But I think the Swans, for me, they just have to be in 13th, because nonetheless, they still have been disappointed. And like the Blues and the D's, three sides that you can't really separate, the Swans, Blues and D's, they have had a poor start. So with those two sides. So I definitely think it has been disappointing for the Swans. So I do have them in 13. Moving on to 12th now, I do actually have the Bombers, so I do have them higher than Port Adelaide. Even though Port Adelaide did lose to them and the Bombers still beat Port Adelaide, I still do have them lower, mainly because they haven't been facing the easiest sides when you look at it. The Bombers, they're actually 4 from 4. They're 4-4 this season, which isn't the worst, but they've just been still disappointing, I feel like. They only just got the win against North, who you do have to give credit to because North do play some great football at Marvel. But I just feel like they haven't been the most convincing. They've had another close win against the Eagles. Then their other wins have been against the D's and the Power. Two sides that did obviously make the eight a couple of years ago. The Power made it last year, but haven't the Power and the D's haven't necessarily been the strongest this year, obviously. So I feel like the Power have had a few more decent and better wins than Essendon. That's why I do have them higher, despite Essendon still beating Port Adelaide. So yeah, look, the Bombers, I definitely think they will improve slightly a bit. I still think they've got a lot of work to do, though, around their midfield. Sorry, not their midfield, around their forward line and the back line especially. They have still been conceding some big scores this year, so they still would want to fix that. Although has been stepping up their back line the last few weeks, it's still been disappointing and just letting them down in games where they can just come out and get thrashed. That's what they are vulnerable to at the moment, and that's kind of why I do have them in at 12th. So yeah, the Bombers, they've been okay to start off this season, but they're going to need to still do a bit of work if they want to be pushing for that 8th spot. Moving on to 11th, and again, I think they are lucky to be ahead of the Bombers, but I do have the Power. The Power obviously got thrashed on the weekend by 90 points, so why should I have them above Essendon? You could even make an argument that they could be in that 15th spot, but the Power, I feel like, before that game, they had won 3 in a row, and even though they weren't the most convincing the week before against North Melbourne, they've still been playing some great football in that patch. The Power, though, similar to Essendon, they've just been conceding big scores, and their plays, kind of like the Blues, just haven't really been stepping up. But, they've still got a very good list, and that has helped them to a few wins this year when they need it, obviously. But nonetheless, they're still being disappointing, and they're honestly lucky to be in 11th in my power rankings with two 50-point losses to the Pies and the Dogs. Maybe maybe there's an away issue, obviously, with them. Maybe there is that away issue. Again, with a lot of interstate sides, they do have troubles traveling, and I feel like that is coming back to the Power this season. Last season they didn't have many issues with that, but yeah, look, the Power, they've had some big losses this year, so they're lucky to be this high, but I still feel like they've been okay this year, and I'm not sure if they'll make the 8 from here, but it's going to be tough. I probably would still back them in, because you just know that group can always get it done, but yeah, look, obviously this is Ken Hinkley's last season, so they've got to make the most out of it, and or maybe they're just saying, maybe this is the end now, so I don't know what's happening with the Power, but I do have them in at 11th. Moving on to 10th now, I do have the Dockers. So on the ladder, they do sit 9th, just actually above the Saints. However, the Saints did thrash them on the weekend, and so I feel like they do have to get moved down. And look, the Dockers, what more can I say? They've just been disappointing away from home. They just have either got thrashed away from home like we saw against the Cats and the Saints, or they've had close to disappointing losses where they just can't defend the ground, like against the D's. They have had one away win against the Tigers that wasn't even in Victoria. It was at the Barossa Park. So, yeah, look, that win doesn't really count. Well, it does count, but it doesn't really count if you know what I mean, as in performing away from home. Even though they were impressive, it was only against the Tigers, who have actually been alright this year, but still. As for the Dockers at home, they've actually been okay, but I feel like they're just two different sides when we talk about them when they're home and away. I feel like they just need to be a little bit more consistent in their away games so they can improve and hopefully make the 8 for their sake, because, yeah, look, there's going to be lots of pressure on them now, especially on Justin Longmuir and their list to really perform. Look, they brought in Shea Bolton in the off-season, some really good recruits, but it's just not really living up to its full potential, and they've still got quite a bit of work to do. So yeah, I could have had them in 9th where they actually do sit on the ladder, but I still feel like they haven't been necessarily the best in living up to their expectations this season. Maybe our expectations were slightly too high on Freo, I'm not sure. I do have them in at 10th though. And just missing the 8 in the power rankings, I do have my Saints. Now the Saints, I definitely feel like have shot a few slightly. They have kind of been brought back down to themselves, or kind of back to how we expected them to go back to reality, you could say, in the last few weeks, getting thrashed by the Dogs and the Lions and having a pretty disappointing loss to the Giants away from home in hot conditions. But I feel like we've actually been okay, and I still feel like we can still make the 8 if we just get things right. We have been dealing with a few injuries, especially in our back half of the midfield. That's been our main issue with all our injuries. Obviously, Max King still hasn't returned, but as for our performances, we did obviously get a very good winner over Freo under the roof at Marvel, which is why I do have us above Freo. It was just a Ross Lyon defensive masterclass, and it definitely brought back that 2010 form and how we played in 2010, where we were able to kick at least 15 or 14 goals while conceding the other opponents to 7 goals or under, which was great. It boosts our percentage, and the reason why you just can't really put the Saints in the 8, maybe you could put them ahead of the likes of the Giants, is because we still have got thrashed in a couple of performances this year, which has been disappointing, like against the Bulldogs and the Lions. And I still feel like we are vulnerable when you compare our lists to the higher end of the competition with those teams that we have got thrashed by. I just feel like we can't be making the 8 when we put up performances like that, and I definitely think the list is going to need some work. I do think we are moving in the right track, though, and we had that really good patch where we won 3 in a row before losing the next 3, where we went 3-1. So we have looked pretty decent this year, but unfortunately I can't have us in the 8 in the power rankings. But I think so far it's been a pretty good season for the Saints, and yeah, look, they've just got to be able to keep on defending and playing the ground really well to move up. Moving on to 8th now, a side that's more been in the downside of the last few weeks in the competition. I'm talking about the Giants. Now, the Giants obviously sit at 4-4 with the same record as the Saints. The Giants, look, they've still been able to find a few good wins this year, especially percentage boosting. They started off their season really hot against the Pies, and they have had some really convincing performances this year against some of the good sides. But in the last few weeks, their pressure's just been lacking off a bit. I feel like more under Adam Kingsley, and I feel like this is where the Giants do go quiet in that mid-patch of the season. We saw it last year. They had a bit of a slump after starting off pretty well. And the Giants, well, look, I would be slightly worried if I'm a Giants fan because, I feel like they should be making the 8 with their list and their expectations. But in the last few weeks, they've been disappointing, and they do sit 4-4 now. So they've just got to find a few more wins in the next weeks to just make sure they can stay in the 8, which against some tougher oppositions isn't going to be easy. They do play the Cats this week at GMHBA, where they do play some good football, but the Giants, I feel like, have been just disappointing in the last few weeks, which has really brought them down. I think they've lost 2 out of their last 4, or 3 out of their last 4, for the Giants. So, yeah, look, disappointing in the last few weeks. I definitely do think that Adam Kingsley and the side can be able to turn it around. We saw it last year. I'm pretty sure they had that poor patch last year, and then they won like 5 or 6 in a row. So, and that's how a lot of teams have gone last year, and throughout this year we see it all the time. So wouldn't be surprised if the Giants can respond, but yeah, look, they've just been a little bit fraudulent as well, the Giants, betting up some of the smaller sides, but I definitely do think that they can get it back together, but I do have the Giants in 8th. Moving on to 7th now, a kind of a similar side. I do have Geelong. Now, the Cats obviously did get a bit lucky on the weekend with Jack Chris missing at the siren to give them the win. The Cats, they've been pretty stock standard this far. I think when you do look at who they have versus this year, obviously I'm pretty sure they do sit at 5-3. They've actually been okay, obviously, with their additions in Bailey Smith. I feel like this is where, obviously, the Cats do start to play some good football, and if they can get the win against the Giants, I think that they could start winning a few more games and push for that top 4. I think they've been slightly average and slightly how we expect them to go. They have had some pretty disappointing losses, like against the Saints, like against the Blues. 2 matches that they probably should have won. So realistically, if they'd have won those matches, they could have been about 7-1 now. So been a bit disappointing. They've had some disappointing performances this year, the Cats, I won't lie, but nonetheless, they've still been going pretty well this year, and I definitely do think that they should be making the 8 or possibly pushing for top 4, so I do have the Cats in 7th, tracking along nicely at the moment. Moving on to 6, a team that's been really inconsistent this year, I do have the Adelaide Crows. Now, the Crows, I do feel like have been just really inconsistent to start off their year. They started off 3-0, then they lost their next 2, then they won, then they lost, then they won, obviously, this week against the Blues. So they've actually had a pretty good start to their season, kind of like the 2023 season. Now it's just going to be whether they can sustain that. Obviously, they wouldn't want to have happen what happened in 2023, where they were playing some great football and fell off late, obviously. But I think the Crows, they've just been going really well. Riley Thilthorpe is playing with a bit of an injury at the moment up forward, which would kind of hurt them. And their offense has fallen off in the last few weeks. I think they were on track to break records for highest scoring since the 90s or something in the first few weeks. They've got the highest score in the season in 161 points this year. So, yeah, they've just been able to definitely transition the ball into their forward half, and they've been creating good looks to score. So the Crows going pretty well. They just need to find a little bit more consistency, kind of like Fremantle and a couple of those other sides like Port. They just need to learn how to play away from home to become that more consistent side, because they've got a decent list, and I definitely think they can do it. They just need to become a little bit more of a consistent side away from home as they mature and get older. That will obviously help out with that. But yeah, just a little bit more consistency away from home, and then they'll be there. But the Crows, pretty decent start to their season. I'm liking what they're doing, and yeah, I have the Crows in at 6. Speaking of inconsistency, a side that hasn't necessarily been the most inconsistent, but has been inconsistent in the last few weeks, I do have the Gold Coast Suns. The Suns, they've lost 1-1 and then lost this weekend, obviously. Who against Brisbane, they were just pretty disappointing, let's be honest. They couldn't score, and I definitely do feel like the Lions are a level above them, kind of just prove where they're at. But the Suns, they've been playing okay this year. I definitely do think that this is their first chance to make finals after starting off 4-0. So, look, they have dropped a couple games since then. They have lost 2 out of their last 3, which has been disappointing. But again, kind of like Adelaide, just need to build that consistency away from home. It's kind of hard to separate Adelaide and Gold Coast from each other at the moment. But yeah, look, they've been pretty decent. I'll give them that this year, the Crows and the Suns. And again, just find consistency away from home, and that's pretty much it. I definitely do think that this is their first opportunity to make the 8. They just need to keep on winning and finding ways at home, make it a fortress, and win a few more away games, then they'll be good to make the 8. So the Suns, pretty good start to their season in what they need. It's just whether they can sustain that moving forward, which they haven't been able to do in recent years, probably for about the last 10 years now. I reckon there's been about 4 or 5 seasons where they've had this good start, then just had it fall away late and missed their finals. So they're going to need to keep that consistency week to week, try and keep that consistency. But yeah, look, the Suns pretty good. I do have them in at 5th in the power rankings, just missing the top 4. Moving on to a side in the comp is that if they had stocks, I'm absolutely buying at the moment. They've just been going really well despite their injuries. I am talking about the Western Bulldogs. I do have the Dogs in the top 4 power rankings. I feel like they deserve it with the way they've been playing. And look, I honestly think they could be 6-2, maybe even 7-1, because if you look at it, they had a game against Brisbane where they were up by 39 points and they let the lead slip. And look, they've been taking it up some really good sides. The only reason why they kind of have just fallen away and lost those games is probably because of their injuries. The Bont's back now. He returned against the Saints, who looked absolutely amazing when they thrashed us. And yeah, the Dogs, they've won 4 and 3 in a row. And it's not just they've been winning. They've been thrashing sides. They thrashed the Saints by 71 points, if I can remember. They beat the Dogs by 31, so that's they beat the Giants by 31, that's a very good win. They ended up also beating Port Adelaide by 90 at Mars Stadium, where they do play some good football. So I think they do play another maybe 1 or 2 matches this year there. They can win both of those. That's going to be massive. And I definitely do think that we do own Luke Beveridge a bit of credit now. I definitely do think he will be here to stay if he can keep up the winning. Now, it's just whether they can maintain that consistency. Again, kind of like Adelaide and Gold Coast. They have been consistent this year, the Bulldogs, but it's just whether they continue that. I definitely think they can, because they've been thrashing sides, not only while being consistent in winning. So they're going to need to keep that up, but they definitely have been one of the most informed teams in the comp. But I definitely do think their odds have risen to about $9 now to win the premiership, which is actually isn't bad. That's probably about the 5th or 6th best in the comp, and they've still got a really good list despite losing some guys in the off-season. Obviously, Jack McRae and the other guy, I forgot his name, sorry, that did get dropped in that midfield by Luke Beveridge. So they've still been going well, and they still have a couple of injuries to come back. The only issue is really now for them is kind of Jamara Ugle-Hagan. I'm not sure what's going on with him. That's kind of been disappointing, though, around the club. But they definitely are ignoring that and moving on the Bulldogs. They were 2-3 a couple of weeks ago. Now they sit 5-3, and I've got them in at 4. Moving on to third, I do have the Hawks. Look, the Hawks could break the top 2, but I feel like they are just a slight level below Brisbane and Collingwood, who are in sit at the 1 and 2 spot at the moment. The Hawks, they did have that little patch where they did lose a couple in the row. Will Day is obviously out of their side, as well as a couple of other outs around the ground. I'm not sure who they are, but they do have a couple of injuries at the moment, the Hawks, which isn't helping, but they have still been playing some great footy and picked up where they left off of last year. Obviously, they are 6-2, so tracking along nicely. I definitely too think if they can just keep playing this great football without Will Day, they should be able to lead themselves to a top 4 finish. They're going to have some down patches in the year. They're still a little bit of a younger list, but they have their new additions in Battle, Barras, and a couple of other ones around the ground are certainly maturing that side now. They're definitely probably getting out of that young stage now. I feel like they're maturing more. And yeah, pretty decent start to their season, the Hawks. I definitely do feel like they are just slightly a level below Collingwood and Brisbane. So not much to say for the Hawks, but yeah, they've been pretty good to start off this season, so I do have them in at third. At number 2 now, this might shock you. Obviously, the Lions are first at the moment, but I have the Lions actually in second, which does leave me the Pies in first. Now, my explanation for the Lions in second is they've won the premiership, right? They're playing some good football, but I don't even feel like they've been at their best. Obviously, I think the win against Gold Coast is a good example, you know. A 17-point win. It was kind of sloppy contest. I don't think it was raining even at the Gabba, but they still got it done. They haven't even been kicking that accurately this year. But they've just been still able to get it done, and I feel like they are the premiership favourites at the moment, which they should be. The reason why I do have the Pies above them, who do sit 6-2, is because the Pies, they've massively responded, especially from where they were at last year. They were still, I had them in my 8. Most people had them in their 8, Collingwood, but a few people still said that they could miss their 8, but with their pickups, they've just been going really well. Obviously, Brisbane are the side with the least amount of losses in the comp, but the Lions, I am going to give them credit where credit's due. They have still been going amazingly, especially without Joe Danaher, who obviously retired at the end of this season in the forward line. But look, they've still been playing some great football, and if they can just keep it up week from week, I think they should be able to have a top 2 finish. Maybe we'll see how the season pans out. But I do have the Pies in first. I still think the Pies have been slightly better than them this year. And the Pies, we do have to remember, did give Brisbane their first and only loss. Not only did they give them their first and only loss, they lost that. They won that. The Pies won that by 52 points. So I think that gives a good explanation why I do have Collingwood in at 1 and Brisbane in at 2. And only one win separates them two from each other. So yeah, Brisbane in at 2 and Collingwood in at 1 for me. So those are my power rankings after round 8 for 2025. Let me know if you agree with any slots, what your power rankings are. Let me know in the comments. And yeah, we'll see you in the next video.